Hello friends, today we are discuss maintenance management, block 2, maintenance resource management, unit 5, spare parts and inventory management. I, Manoj Kumar Rao, Professor Operation Management, going to present the overviews of spare parts and inventory management. So before going to that topics, you have to understand the fundamental aspect of spare parts in maintenance management and the overview of inventory management so that the company will optimize the inventory level to maximize their production level. So let's understand what are the different objectives of spare parts and inventory management. So objective number one, first we have to define what is spare parts inventories. Then point number two, understand the objective of spare parts management. The next point number three, understand the need of for spare parts management. The next we have identified the different techniques of spare parts. The next is know the practical application of APCs and traditional costing of spare parts inventories and understand the framework for spare parts management. So these are the basic objective for today's sessions. And after the session, we have to go for the outcomes. So what are the outcomes we have learned? The first one is identify the different types of parts. After learning from this particular session, we have to go for the outcomes and explain the role and importance of spare parts and inventory management in maintenance efficiencies. Develop procurement strategy or purchase strategies for spare parts and maintenance supplies. Then difference between various inventory management techniques and their methodologies. So let's start the sessions. So if you go to the fundamental introduction of spare parts, the spare parts or the management of company spare parts, stocks, and warehouse are frequently tied not only the operation of the companies, but they are also focused upon the maintenance division of the organizations. So, in case of spare parts and inventory management, it is the responsibilities, job descriptions involve the operation departments as well as the maintenance division of the organizations so that they can go for less amount of or optimize the level of spare parts or inventories so that higher side of profit goes to the organizations. Point number two, if you observe, it is an essential part of the management of upkeeping activities that takes place on a daily basis, as well as in case of preparation of preventive work that will take place in the foreseeable futures. So whenever you think about the management of companies, spare parts, stocks, inventories, most of the cases, the maintenance department as well as the operation divisions are take the responsibility to go for daily wise that is known as upkeep the activities related to stock maintenance, spare parts maintenance. And they also go for that is known as advanced preparation of your preventive work, which is directly related to spare parts as well as the inventories and the stock of different equipments. So if you observe this particular images, there are number of activities are basically concerns and those who are directly associated with spare parts management, it is their duties. So they must go for upkeeping the different inventories and inform to the higher authority so that the minimum stock levels will be maintained to avoid any kind of that is known as breakdown or error in the systems. Moving to next one, the next one is if you go to the concept of inventories or spare parts inventories, the spare parts or the term spare parts inventories, it basically refers to a list of stocks, goods that are used by the maintenance professional to replace the broken down component of various pieces of equipments. So let's take an example of automobile industries. And starting from the engine components, we have the speedometers, we have spark plug, we have engine pistons, cranks, we have tail lights, LED headlights, we have the known braking systems, we have alloy wheels, we have mirrors. So these are the common, even tires and tire wheels, and even lubricants, the jigs, even keys are also the spare part in case of automobile that is known as industries, or maybe a spare parts for a automobile, for a car. So being a owner of that particular car or being the owner of that car, in that cases, you have to maintain the minimum stock level so that you can easily avoid any kind of breakdowns. And if breakdown will be happen, you can easily replace this broken piece of various pieces with related to automobile industries. Point number two, the term spare parts distinguish the particular type of inventories that are required management, and the type of material refer to the component that are essential to the maintenance and continuity of operations. So, for example, in case of engine, spark plug is a essential component. So you have to maintain at least one or two pieces of spark plug, so that if you face any kind of that is known as operating conditions failures, in that cases you can directly replace with the new ones. That is the concept of that is known as spare parts inventories in case of automobile industries. So the thing is that whenever you go for properly managing the spare parts, inventory can be result considerable saving large amount of money, especially reference to revenue generations, operating expenses is less, and that maximize the profit for a particular companies. So in this regard, we have certain amount of points are there. We have to understand each and every point first. So if you go for the physical stock of parts can be reduced by properly accounting for existing inventory. So that is why it is the duty of that is known as store managers. They can assign number of supervisors to go for physical investigation of stocks. And if any stock is that is known as minimized or not available, they immediately refer to the or inform to the higher authorities. So if it goes to the first of the physical stock of the parts can be reduced by properly accounting for existing inventories and setting proper stocking levels, and replacement actions should be taken. Moving to next one, the second one, having proper spare part available, one will greater reduce the production downtime and equipment availabilities. So if you provide on time basis, or in case of you are applying just in time concept in case of providing the spare parts, you can reduce the production downtimes or breakdown downtimes. And the next important part is equipment availabilities. So these are the basic overview of your spare parts inventories. So why inventory is most important part? If you optimize the level of inventories, in that cases holding cost is applicable. So that is why most of the company are basically optimize the level of inventories so that their holding cost should not be increased. And if your holding cost is increased in that manner, it is directly affect the operational expenses as well as it is also affect the revenue generation of the companies. So that is why those who are directly assigned with the spare parts on inventory management, in that case, especially reference to production departments as well as the maintenance departments, are take care about the level of spare parts inventory so that any kind of operation failure will not happen in the organizations. Moving to next one. The next one is importance of spare parts inventory management. So let's understand what are the different importance parameters we have. The first one is spare parts management play an important role in achieving the desired plant availabilities at optimum cost. The second one, we have manufacturing units are normally capital intensives, especially reference to mass production oriented and with sophisticated technologies. And for these two important points, most that is known as you have to optimize the cost of inventory in every aspect, so that this cost should not be influence your profit maximizations. And the next important part is whatever capital is invested in case of that is known as spare parts, it is very that is known as large volume of equipments or purchase of different machines, tools, or those who are directly involved in case of mass productions or in case of highly sophisticated technologies. So that is why nowadays that is a unique problem faced by the manufacturing units and management in controlling and managing the spare parts. The first important point we have. So there is a element of uncertainties as to when a part is required and also the quantity of its requirements. So this is due to the fact that failure of a components either due to the wearing out. So whenever you focus upon the element of uncertainty, for example, you are using a pump or you are using a gearbox more than 10 years. So in that cases, there is the most important percentage of that is known as failure will be happen to that pump or gear vessels, and maybe there may be a chance of tear out from the that is known as inner parts as well as external parts. So keep view of these kind of problem, which is basically managing by the maintenance departments as well as controlling by the production management departments. The next important point, spare parts are not that easily available in the market as they are not fast moving items. The original equipment manufacturer has to supply the spare part in the most cases. So it is very much difficult to get a complex part. For example, you are using number of CNC machines and rapidly due to higher side of known as competitive market, many company are also goes to that known as marketing level or manufacturing levels. So being a companies, whenever you go for smooth functioning of your entire production facilities, so you have to take care about to establish better industrial relation with the suppliers, so that you can only get original equipment or original spare parts. The next important part is number and the variety of spare parts are too large makings, and it is very much close control more tedious. So if you go for number of varieties, number of specification of spare parts, in that case, it is very much difficult to control. So in that cases, you have to focus upon those spare parts which have number of varieties and number of that is known as making large that is close controls more tedious over there. The next is we have there is a tendency from the stage of purchase of the equipment to the stage of use of the spare parts to requisition spare parts more number than the actual required and accumulate the spare part takes place. So for example, in this particular point, if your bicycle required or your motor bicycle is required two number of tires, if you go for purchase of extra one number of tires, so there is no use of the tires at least for 4 to 5 years. So in that cases, holding cost is applicable, and this holding costs are hidden cost, which is directly or indirectly affect your production expenses, and that expenses also affect your revenue generations. So keeping view in case of the tendency of purchase, the tendency of spare parts use, the next is spare parts. If you go for more amount of spare parts, it should be properly go for actual need versus the excess amount of purchase which is done by the many companies. So it is the duty of maintenance department. They go for optimum level of inventory as well as spare parts. Point number 5, the rate of consumption of some of the spare parts is very high, and while some of the spare parts are very low. So in view of number of spare parts who are highly consumed or who are less consumed, that should be properly classified by the maintenance departments. So these are the important of your spare parts and inventory management. Moving to next one. The next one we have the objective of spare parts management. So in under objective of spare parts management, the first important part is it is ensured by the department levels, sub-department levels. The next important part is for the availability of spare parts for maintenance and the repair of the plant and machinery as when it is needed or required at the optimum cost. So the spare parts to be of right quantities, and some of the benefit if you go for utilizing the systematic approach for maintaining inventory as well as spare parts management, which basically includes the first important point is reduce inventory cost. Then point number 2 we have that is justified the basics of carrying costs. Then reduce the probability of run out of stocks and address the total cost of ownership, which is shortly known as TCO, for the supply chain management of spare parts. The point number 5, we have improved the condition of spares, and the last one is linkage of spare parts level to the actual critical of assets. So these are the different that is known as systematic approach needed for the spare parts management. I just repeat, the first one is reduce inventory cost, then justify the basic for carrying cost. The next one, reduce the probability of running out of stock, then address the total cost of ownership for the supply chain management, The next one we have the improved condition of spares, linkage of spare parts level to the actual critical of assets. So moving to next one, the next one is the need for your spare parts maintenance. So in case of spare parts management, the factor which necessitates the scientific spare part management. The first important point we have random and unpredictable pattern of failures of machine and equipment. So that is why we need to maintain the optimum level of known as spare parts or inventory. For example, you cannot predict the puncture of a tires, or you cannot predict that is known as unpattern of failure of your machines or engines. So you have to maintain optimum level of that is known as spare parts as well as inventories. Then point number two, long lead time is required for the procurement of spare parts from the original equipment manufacturers. So it's a long or lengthy process to get the original equipments and spare parts from the manufacturers. So whenever you require this kind of spare parts and inventories, you have to that first write down the requisition form. The requisition form goes to the purchase department. Then purchase department generate the invoice, and this invoice is basically goes towards or purchase order should be generated, and this purchase order directly goes to the original manufacturers. So when original manufacturers is identify or investigating their stock levels, if it is available, then they provide the green signal for releasing the original equipment towards the device manufacturers. So through the different mode of transportation, finally it should be reached to the premises of organizations. So whenever I elaborate starting from the department level to store, then store to purchase department, and purchase department take the approval from the finance department. Then after the purchase order should be released to the suppliers. And whenever the supplier is provided, they have a number of documentation is required. They take the mode of transportations, and finally should be reached to the that is known as manufacturing company. So due to the long lead times required in case of purchase of your spare parts management, that is why it is the duty of maintenance department as well as the production department by keeping view of maintaining the stock level at the optimum quantities. The third point we have difficulty in case of manufacturing spare parts because of non-availability of special materials. So if it goes to the various that is known as manufacturing industry, those who are basically use special kind of metal like your titaniums. Some company are using diamond cutting tools to provide precise that is known as work, and some company are using highly automated machines for manufacturing of complex parts. So in view of spare parts management, it is difficult in case of manufacturing organizations or manufacturing the spare parts because the non-availability of special kind of material, especially for your spare parts and inventories. The next one, we have high tendency for obsolescence of machines and equipments. So these four are the most important necessity of scientific spare part management. So that is why I just repeat that the maintenance management department as well as the production department, they have to optimize the level of inventories as well as the spare parts so that whenever it's needed, they immediately take the additional amount of or optimum level of inventories. So no breakdowns, no failures, no wear out and tear should be happen inside the organizations to interrupt the flow of material, especially reference to production activities. Moving to next one. The next one we have that is known as spare parts inventory management system. So in case of spare parts inventory management systems, first we have to go for take the example of this particular case. That means we have the company have the central warehouse, and in case of central warehouse, there are a number of suppliers are there. So just like inland suppliers, overseas suppliers, in company suppliers are there. So centralized warehouse or central warehouse are basically attached with local warehouse, and local warehouse to maintenance department, and maintenance stations or provide the services to the end customers. So for example, you are go for spare parts inventory management system for your own automobiles. So in that cases, whenever you reach to that particular service providers, so they have a number of maintenance stations are there, and these maintenance stations are well connected to local warehouse. Those who are take the responsibilities for supply of spare parts for automobile industries, and these local warehouses are well connected to the central warehouse. So, for example, there is a scarcity of any spare parts at local warehouse levels. They immediately communicate to the central warehouse so that they can provide the spare parts on times to avoid customer irritations, to avoid any kind of interruption, especially to the service provide to the or maintenance service provide to the automobiles. So let's understand what are the different theoretical aspects are there. The first one is managing a company stock holding requires a specialized kind of software, and these softwares are simply known as spare parts inventory management system softwares. And these softwares comprise information on a business stock holdings. And if you goes to the capacity level, the capacity of inventory management system to provide update on the availability of spares is one of the most important and useful features of this particular software. So let's take the other examples. So if you observe the other that is known as image, so the centralized that is known as distribution system for spare parts industries are providing the different kind of spare parts to different industries. For example, motors, pump, tools, gears, then that is known as various lubricants are provided to different that is known as local warehouse. From the local warehouse to that is known as maintenance station, and finally it should be provided to the end customers so that the customer easily that is known as get the maintenance services by the help of this software. And the next important part, as I told, that is any scarcity or unavailability of spare parts. They will establish the strong communications between the centralized warehouse, or you can simply pronounce as for number of supplier to the central warehouse and central warehouse to local warehouse. So when the unavailability of spare parts is there, in that case, they also establish a bigger amount of communication from the maintenance station to the local warehouse as well as local warehouse to central warehouse. And if it is not available in the central warehouse, they are also establish the communication between number of suppliers who are previously tie up with the softwares. So most of the cases in small scale industries, they are basically implement the maintenance of spare parts as well as inventory management system by the help of ERP softwares, entrepreneur resource planning softwares. So under ERP softwares, they will directly provide large amount of data, which is basically compiled for the business stock holdings, inventory holdings, spare parts holdings, and whenever it should be released, they immediately update the information so that should not be any kind of scarcity of unavailability of spare parts will be arise inside the organizations. Moving to next one. The next one is effective spare parts management systems. So in the previous section, we have understood how the softwares or information system will help to establish larger amount of the different communication between number of workstations or maintenance workstations, then local warehouse, and finally central warehouse, and the last one is the different number of suppliers. So in this manner, the communications as well as the fund, the next important part is the material flow should be established. So the next one, how to maximize the effective spare parts management. The most of the cases, the organization is to go forward in methodical manners in order to build the effective system for the management of spare parts, and how they have established the methodical manners in order to build up the efficient systems. We'll understand. The next is the organization is able to minimize the duplication of spare parts stocks, which leads towards the reduction in case of inventories. So, for example, in case of small scale industries, so they can easily identify through the physical verifications. But in case of larger industries, those who have number of divisions, and under number of divisions, they have number of systems are there, and number of system, number of departments are there, and number of departments, sub departments are there. So in that case, it is very difficult to go for that is known as minimize the duplications, because each and every department will maintain the optimum level of spare parts. So by the implementation of different that is known as inventory and spare parts management system software, it is basically minimize the duplication of spare parts, especially reference to stockings in different stores and warehouses. So let's understand how the computerization spare parts control system is made easier by coding of spare parts and the preparation of spare parts catalogs. So these are the different points. So we'll understand the different point first. First one is identifying of replacement components. The second one, we have projection of the need of spare parts. The next is we must go for examination of availability of spare parts, or you can simply know investigation of availability of spare parts. Then the fourth one, we have establishment of regulation for variety of categories. Then the control system for inventory of spare parts are now being developed. Then maintaining a stock of insurance policies for both capital as well as insurance spares. Then policy regarding stockings of rotating spares and subassembly. The next we have replacement policy for spare parts. The next we have examination of auxiliary components, the local production of replacement parts, the remanufacturing of used and discarded components, and the next is establishment of bank of spare parts. And last we have application of computing technology to the management of spare parts. So these are the computerized spare parts control system which is applied inside the organization. For example, if you go to the establishment of bank of spare parts, for example, I have take the example of a small scale industries where the store is located centrally and the stores act like a bank of spare parts. So each and every department can communicate that particular stores to provide the spare parts on the basis of just in time. Just it is needed to maintain or to avoid the breakdown in case of machines and equipment. For example, projection of need of spare parts. Why projection is needed? The thing is that if you not projected the need of spare parts from the department level to the division level and division level to the system level, so it should be fail in case of computerized spare parts control system. So for example, you are not maintaining the stock of insurance policies for both capital and insurance spares. So if any kind of natural calamity will happen, in that cases, entire expenses is bear by the companies. The next one is if you go for replacement policy for spare parts. So you have to go for large amount of different classification of maintenance policies. For example, if you are implementing preventive maintenance, corrective maintenance, or in day-to-day maintenance, in that cases, the replacement policy should be there for certain amount of machines, certain amount of tools, certain amount of equipments. The next we have local production of replacement parts. If it is possible, you must go for local production activities inside the organization, as well as you also go for outsourcing of replacement parts. So these are the key points for computerization of spare parts control systems. I hope it is clear to all. Going to next one. The next one is analysis of your spare parts inventories. So in this section, we have to go for the classification of inventory spare parts by using number of analysis. So why analysis is needed? The analysis of inventory of spare parts based upon several criteria, such as the frequency of issue. The next one is annual consumption values, the criticalities, the lead time of your spare parts, and the most important part, the unit price of your spare part is vital for the success of your management of spare parts industries. So in case of frequency of use, if you go for cotton waste, it is vastly used by many departments. But if you go for the known hydraulic oil, so the annual consumption of hydraulic oil is less. Similarly, if you go for the complex spare parts of gearboxes, number of gears are there. Some criticality should be there. The next is if you go for the lead time, the definition of lead time, that means the time between initiate a process and end a process. And the last important part, you have to focus upon the unit price of your spare parts. These are the vital point which is help the organizations in case of successful management of your spare parts. So these are the following description of many assessment of the inventory of spare parts that are commonly used. The first one is SN analysis. The second one we have ABC analysis. The third one we have VD analysis. The fourth one we have SDE analysis. And the last one we have HML analysis. So let's discuss what are the FNS analysis, ABC analysis, VD analysis, SDE analysis, and the last one is HML analysis, one by one in the upcoming slide. So first one we have that is known as FNS analysis. So FNS analysis stand for that is known as F stand for fast moving inventories, then S stand for your slow moving inventories, and N stand for your non-moving inventories. So why this FNS analysis is most important part of your spare parts inventory management? Because it helps the business to identify which item to stock, how much to stock, and how to allocate the resources when it is needed for maintenance related works. So if you observe the that is known as block diagram, that is fast moving inventories, we have inventory control is applied, that is known as stock in the block. In case of slow moving inventories, we have limited quantities, and non-moving inventories, that is means get rid of. So these are the different policies applied by the organizations to control the inventory levels. And what are the benefit of your fast moving, slow moving, and non-moving analysis? The first one is reduce the cost. So how to reduce the cost? By avoiding the stock pilings and reduce the holding cost. So if you reduce your holding cost, automatically the inventory level should be optimized, and it should not be directly affect your operational expenses. And if your operational expenses is reduced, the profit maximization is goes higher side for the organizations. So it's a positive sign for the industries. Next one is improve customer service. So meet customer demand by ensuring high demand item are available. So in that cases, whenever customer is needed the items, and if you provide the item, for example, fast moving item in a grocery shop. So those who are that is known as commodity items are fast moving items. The next one is if you go for slow moving items. For example, if you go for what is known as salt in a grocery shop, it is slow moving items. And non-moving items once in a year, once in a month, those are the items basically under the non-moving items. The third one is improve sustainability. So reduce waste by identifying the non-moving items. So if industry is finding non-moving items, they can easily reduce that is known as wastage to improve sustainability. The next is improve cash flows. As I told us, holding cost, due to this holding cost is decreased, higher side of the profit margin should be gained by the company side. So in case of improved cash flow, set the effective profit margin for the fast moving items. So when the demand is very much higher side for a specific fast moving items, the company must provide the item on time deliveries on the basis of that is maximize the profits. So these are the overviews of your fast moving, slow moving, and non moving items. Moving to next one. The next one we have that is known as ABC analysis. So ABC analysis is basically go for that is known as analysis is a technical or technique for categorizing the inventory item based on their values and their importance to the business. So it is used to help the business optimize the inventory as well as resource allocations. So if you observe the ABC classifications, under A items we have expensive inventories and accurate control required. Similarly, in case of moderate B items are moderate value inventories and moderate control required. So in case of C, these are low cost inventories, that means minimum control required. So let's take an example of a healthcare organizations where the number of diagnosis machines like your X-ray machines, then MRI machines are under very expensive inventories, and the accurate control level should be required. So if you observe in case of healthcare organizations, they maintain 1 and 2 machines. Similarly, if you go for moderate value inventories, in the same example of healthcare organizations, pharmaceutical items are moderate values inventories. So in that cases, moderate control should be required. And in case of that is known as low cost inventory, these are consumable items like cotton, spirits, Dettol, Savlons, a bandage, and they are basically minimum control required because it consumes highest amount and the cost is very low. So, what are the benefit of your ABC analysis? It helps the business understand which product are more profitable. And the next is help business predict which product will be generate the most revenue in the futures. And it help the business optimize the inventories. In the same manner, I will told that if you optimize the inventory, there is no need to go for holding cost or extra holding cost is applicable. And if there is no holding cost, automatically your revenue generation is goes higher side. The next is help business reduce risks. So if you already categorize into A, B, C, so there is a less amount of risks should be happens to the organizations. Then business maintain control over the costly items. And the last one is help business ensure optimum level of stocks are maintained. So these are the key benefits of your ABC analysis. So in view of expensive items, then moderate items and low cost items, they have go for analysis of different category of inventories, and it basically optimize the inventory as well as the resource allocation inside of organizations. Moving to next one. The next one we have VED analysis. So V stand for vitals, E stand for essential, D stand for desirables items. So let's understand what are the V item or vital item or essential items and desirable items. So under vital items, we have high importance, then item without which treatment come to the standstills, that is non-availability cannot be tolerated. And the next one is in case of essential item, these are moderately important. Item whose non-availability cannot tolerate for the 2 to 3 days because of similar and alternative items are available. But in case of desirable items, less importance, item whose non-availability can also tolerate for the long periods. So if you go to the fundamental concept of VED analysis, this method of inventory management classified item into 3 categories, that means vital, essential and desirables, and it helps the business prioritize the inventory control and resource allocations. So if you take the example of that is known as automobile industries, so high importance or vital items, for example, engines. The next one is moderate importance items. That means you can go for that is known as maintain the lubricant levels or lubricants grease. So you can tolerate it for 2 to 3 days if the level is little bit drop. And less important item, for example, so a small that is known as pin was removed from the seat as well as seat belt, or maybe the handle grips. So this item cannot be available, can tolerate for a long amount of period. So if your that is known as handle grip is cracked or tear, so in that case it should be managed if it is not available for the long period of time. So depending upon the availability or priorities of inventories, the resource should be properly allocated. So if you go for vital items, it would causes a major distortion if they are not available and they were to run out the industries. Then in case of essential importance to the business operation, but are not as critical as the vital items. And in case of your desirable items, non-essential to the business operations, but they are still important in case of that is known as inventories. So these are the overviews of your VED analysis, which stand for vital, essential, and desirable items. Moving to next one. The next one we have STE analysis. So S stand for scary, D for difficult, and E for easy analysis. So this STE analysis is a technique for categorizing inventory based on how easy to get it, and it helps the business manage inventory more efficient and cost effective. So if you observe this particular block diagram, the STE analysis based on the criteria of availability of items, and I've already told that S stand for scary items, D stand for difficult item, and E stand for easily available items. So what are the benefit of STE analysis? The first one is help business to understand the demand and availabilities. For example, if you take the cases of if the engine component is not available, so these are under in case of that is known as scary items. The next one is without chain sprockets. It is difficult to drive the bicycles. So these are difficult items. And in case of easily available items, for example, the tires, tubes, bolts and nuts, these are basically easily available. So if you goes to the next that is known as benefit of ST analysis, it helps the business prioritize the stock management and optimize the cost, help business ensure the smooth operation from one end to other end, and help business streamline, especially reference to demand and supply chains. So these are the key benefits belong to ST analysis. Moving to next one. The next one we have HML analysis. So HML analysis, or H stand for high, M stand for medium, low stand for, so the L stand for low analysis. So this is the methods for categorizing inventory item based on their unit price. It is used to help the inventory management as well as control. So let's understand what are the high price items, what are the medium price items, what are the low price items. So in case of high price items, tight control of inventory should be done. Then more frequent verification of stock. If needed, you must go for physical verification of stock. Then third one, we have purchase policy for closure control on purchase. And the last one, we have high storage security should be needed in case of high price items. The next we have that is known as medium price items. So medium control should be required on consumptions, and the frequent verification of stock should be needed. So mostly done by the that is known as store supervisors. The next one we have medium control on purchase. The next one we have medium securities of storage should be required. Similarly, if you go for low price items, less control on consumptions, less frequent verification of stock, less stringent control on purchase, standard security provided, and if you observe the benefits, especially reference to HML analysis, it helps the businesses prioritize their inventory management effort. The next one we have, it helps the business focus upon high value item that generate more revenues. It helps the business to reduce the attention and expenses on the low value items. And the last benefit we have, it helps the business ensure that critical products are always on stocks. So depending upon the that is known as price, like high price item, medium price item, low price items, their priority basis inventory will be missing. And here the unit price is most important aspect for inventory management as well as controls. So moving to next one. The next one is classification of spare parts. So let's understand this particular that is known as how the spare parts are classified. So first one is based on the capital spare. The second one is insurance spare. Then overall spares. Then wear and tear spare. And the last one is consumable spares. So under critical spares, or sorry, capital spare, these are the critical spare and are usually replaced during the capital repair of equipment. For example, a company takes 6 months shutdown. In that cases, most capital share are easily replaced so that there should not be any interruption should be happen to the manufacturing industries. The next one is insurance spare. So an insurance spare is a spare part which impact of not holding the spare parts in the store can be massive. So it is an insurance against the failure for such which the downtime costs are very high. For example, you cannot that is known as maintain a transformers or maybe a power generator inside a stores. And in that cases, the company take the insurance against such failure. For example, failure of transformers, failure of grids, and in that cases, the time costs are very high. So these spare parts may lie in the stores for many years, and these spare parts need conservation activities at regular intervals. This spare blocks the working capital because insurance spare need large amount of capitals. So moving to next one, the overhaul spares. These spares are those spares parts which must be replaced every time the equipment is disassembles or reassembles. For example, if you go for that is known as maintenance work for engines of a four-wheelers or engine of a two-wheelers. So whenever you dismantles, you must go for overall spare. Means you have to take care about the bearing materials. Then the next important are the movable parts, especially reference to the springs. The next important part, small nut and bolts. And the last one is the sealing kits are basically used under the overall spares. The next one we have wear and tear spares. So under wear and tear spares, these spares are those spare parts which have regular wear and tears in the course of operation of the equipment and need to be replaced after a definite number of hours and equipment operation. For example, conveyor belts, belt of belt drive, belt of motors, belt of gearboxes. So they must wear and tears in a regular interval after using 24 hour, 48 hour, or maybe 2 to 3 days it require. So in every interval you have to go for the replacement of this wear and tear spares so that your operation should not be interrupted. And the next important part is the equipments should be smoothly flow of raw material from one places to other. Last one is consumable spares. So these are regularly used, such as fastener like bolt and nut, then sealant or seals, gasket which is used in case of gearboxes or engines, and for electrical maintenance they are vastly used fuse. So these are usually low cost items, or in case of the known as capacitor in the ceiling fans, are the consumable spare parts under this particular category. So I repeat, if you go for the uh, classification system of spare parts, it is of that is known as five types. The first one is capital spare. The second one is insurance spares. The third one we have overhaul spares. The next, the fourth one we have wear and tear spare, and the last one we have consumable spares. Moving to next one. The next one is the practices of spare parts management. How we are implementing the best practice inside the organizations for maintaining the spare parts in the form of optimum levels. How the companies manage the different spare parts so that more effectives should be observed in case of maintenance management. So the first important part, you have to identify all the spares depending upon the values, or depending upon the uses, depending upon the priorities, depending upon the availabilities. The next is you must go for classify all the spares. As I told, the classification goes for capitals. The next one is insurance. The third one we have overall. The fourth one we have wear and tears, and the last one we have consumables. The third one we have utilize and manage the bill of materials. So the bill of material is consist of the list of item for managing the spare parts. So entire specification should be decoded in the form of bill of material, which is basically used by store department as well as purchase department. And by taking the approval from the production department, they will manage the bill of materials. The next is use the work orders. It is also important part. If you not use the work order, you cannot find the company, original companies. The next important part, the way bills for the transportations. The next important part is they will provide the large amount of the specifications should be needed in case of work bill. What is the quantity, what is the price, what is the source, and who are the different third party who is basically involved in case of providing the spare parts. The next is limited access to the parts warehouse inventories. So if you not limited the access of that is known as people's, in that cases there may be chance of this in case of theft, or in case of broken, or in case of damage, or in case of wear and tears, which is happening in certain warehouses. So it is the duty of that is known as top level of management. They have provided the authorizations to few amount of people so that they can go for access the different parts of warehouse for inventory management. The next is optimize the warehouse. In case of space should be properly optimized. In case of that is known as they should go for space management. The next one is EG, that is known as stocking of that is known as spare parts. They must go for that is known as initiation of automotive retrieval system, automotive storage system. So by the help of this system, you can easily optimize the warehouse. Even it should need the information technology supports. The next one we have use an inventory control systems. So as we discussed, there are certain amount of inventory control system are there. For example, some company are using just-in-time concept. Some company are using economy order quantity systems. Some company are using ABC analysis. Some company are go for HTML analysis. Some company are go for video analysis. So these are the different inventory control techniques and systems to be introduced to the spare parts management. Then define the stock location for every parts. So there should be a designated place for the different kind of stock. For example, in case of maintaining oil and grease or lubricants, so there by a separate designated place should be there. Similarly, if you go for that is known as bearing materials, so the bearing material should be placed in a place areas where the moisture content is less, which is directly affect the bearing. The next is standardized spare parts. So for standardized spare parts, every organization have their own SOP, that is standardized operating procedure for maintaining spare parts are there. So whenever a new employee as well as the existing employees are involved, they can easily understand the proper standardization of spare parts, how to unload, how to load, how to use, how to handle, and the next is how to maintain the stock keeping records. Moving to next one, develop the spare parts management process. So there are few amount of software is recently used, that is known as inventory management system software, or other company are also using the known as warehouse management system software. So these software provide larger amount of known as development, especially reference to spare parts management process. So if you go to large scale industry, they are also providing various amount of cross-docking systems for easy loading and unloading of the known as broken material and unloading of the known as different spares, so that they can easily pick and go for the known as automatic retrieval and an automatic storage system. Last one is decide based on the accurate data. So whatever you have identified, classified, maintain the known as bill of material, work order, a limited amount of access to the warehouse, optimize the level of inventory. All the data should be accurate and there should be record keeping for the course of future actions, as well as to review the past failure for maintaining the spare parts. So these are the practices basically used in case of spare parts management. I just repeat: identify all the spare parts, classify all the spare parts, utilize and manage the bill of materials, use the work order, limited access to the parts warehouse inventories, optimize the warehouse, use and inventory control systems, define stock location for every part, standardize spare parts, develop spare parts management process, decide based on accurate data. So these are the best practices which is applied inside the organization for maintaining the optimum level of spare parts in maintenance management. Moving to next one. So next one is framework for your spare parts management. So in case of spare parts management, we have three layers of the known as spare parts management levels are there. So in case of layer one levels, we have objective of spare parts management. So if you carefully observe this particular figure, under the objectives of level one or layer one, we have minimize the availability of spare for maintenance and repair. So in case of maximize the availability of spare for maintenance and repair. So in that cases, you have to establish better industrial relation with other supplier, so that the company will only receive the genuine product, original product. Then minimize the economic cost. So by implementing various amount of the known as spare parts management techniques, spare parts management systems, spare parts management softwares, you can easily optimize the economic cost, especially reference to spare parts management. So these two objectives are belong to layer one. Then we have layer two, that means main tasks of spare parts management through the equipment life cycles. So what are the main tasks? For example, design, simplification of your machines, equipment and tools. Then P stand for your provision for replacements. So similarly, in case of layer two, we have three pages are there. The first one is initial procurements. So under initial procurement, you must focus upon the system designs. So whenever you go for purchase of a machine, first you have to analyze your existing system design, whether the machine is suitable for your existing system or it should be basically penetrate the systems. So the next important part under the initial procurement, we have initial provisions. So after initial provision, we must go for the known as phase two, that is known as normal operations. So under normal operations activities, you have to review the system designs. That means layout of machines, then number of workstations, and you have to maintain that is higher side of gap between one workstation to other workstation, so that material should be moved as well as the parts should be moved from one places to other places, and the operators are easily moved from one workstation to other workstation. These are basically review under the system design of manufacturing. Then next is parts replacement should be there. So these 2 points are basically under the normal operation. It is basically dedicated for production oriented system or maybe the production department. The third stage we have that is known as end of life. So under end of life, we have to go for reviews on that is known as sourcing. That includes the provision for reuse. If it is manufactured locally, it's okay. And if it is not manufactured locally, then we must go for that known as sourcing of these machines. And in some cases, it should be replaced by many authorities. So they also provide the final provision whether they can go for reuse or replacements. So in case of layer 2, as I told that main stocks of spare parts management through the equipment life cycles. So under the equipment life cycles, we have 3 number of phases. The phase 1 is initial procurement, phase 2 is normal operation, and phase 3 is end of life. Then the last layer we have that is known as operations disciplines for supporting spare parts management. So how the spare parts will maintain or manage by using of operation discipline. So first we have simulations. So it is very difficult in case of go for physical simulations. That is why company should be converted into a systems, and the system should directly made a replica. For that replica, they are applied the simulation analysis whether the system will register if the company will go for replacement of new machines or installation of new machines. And under the simulations, they can easily identify the alternative designs. So if you go for many assembles that is known as line in manufacturing industries, before go for that is known as physical that is known as constructions, they go for simulations. The next one is multi-criteria classifications. So under multi-criteria classifications, so here the classification of inventory control should be there. So it is based upon the ABC analysis, fast, slow, non-moving analysis. The next is HML analysis or VD analysis. So they can classify the inventory based upon their unit cost, based on their priorities, based on their uses or consumption. So depending upon the multi criteria classification, they must go for demand forecasting. So demand forecasting is essential whenever you go for spare parts management because most of the breakdown are unpredictables. So that is why they conduct that is known as qualitative forecasting as well as quantitative forecasting. In most cases, to maintain the spare parts, they are basically focused on quantitative forecasting. So under quantitative forecasting, they have that is known as number of methods are there. That is simple moving methods. The next is weighted moving methods or exponential forecasting should be considered. The next is after forecasting, as I told, that is forecasting method evaluations are there. That means forecasting initial demand, then forecasting ongoing demands, then forecasting final demand should be there. So these provide the optimum results for maintaining the framework for spare parts maintenance. So what is the optimizations? The first one is optimize the system parameters, reuse the chain designs, optimize the replacement quantities, and end of life orders. So these are under layer 3. So I repeat, framework for spare parts management are of 3 types. Layer 1, objective of spare parts management. Layer 2, main tasks of spare parts management for the equipment life cycles. And layer 3, operation discipline for supporting spare parts management. So these are the key aspects of your framework for spare parts management. Thank you.